Man, see, I've been trying to tell y'all. That Jerry Jeudy is not safe. I just have a feeling. Listen, man, if GM Andrew Berry and Todd Monken was willing to come off of Myles Garrett, you damn sure better believe they're not going to be playing games with Jerry Jeudy. We got to get into this article. As it says, Jerry Jeudy could be on the move, man. They are not sold on him being a number one wide receiver. We got to get into it. Welcome to Keep the Vision. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share the channel, hit that bell notification, hype the video.
Cleveland just sent a message, and it wasn't subtle. Somewhere inside the Browns facility in Berea, front office executives are reportedly having conversations that could reshape the entire wide receiver room, and the name sitting at the center of it is one nobody expected to hear this soon. Jerry Jeudy, the same player Cleveland traded for just 2 seasons ago, the same player who quietly put together a career year in 2024, is now being mentioned in trade speculation ahead of the deadline. That alone would be enough to grab headlines on its own. But there's a second storyline unfolding at the exact same time, one that might actually explain everything happening with the first. A rookie quarterback that almost nobody trusted last spring is reportedly turning heads in ways that are hard to ignore. And what's allegedly happening behind closed doors with him is starting to make people ask an uncomfortable question. What if the Browns aren't just adjusting their receiver room? What if they're quietly redesigning the entire philosophy of how this roster gets built, one decision at a time? Stick around, because by the end of this, you're going to see this whole situation in a completely different light than when you clicked on it. Let's start with where Jerry Jeudy actually came from, because his story didn't begin in Cleveland, and understanding where he started is essential to understanding why his name carries so much weight in trade conversations today.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
We are going to get right into things. This is courtesy of Dog Pound Daily, man. Here it says the right time to trade, time for the Browns to trade Jerry Jeudy is becoming obvious. Okay, here it says Jeudy came to Cleveland 2 seasons ago with controversy tied to his name after playing out a tumultuous 4 seasons with the Broncos. He was traded to the Browns in the spring of 2024, and it says the wide receiver has spent his whole career on a roller coaster of emotion. Okay, he doesn't seem happy wherever he is and lets his team and fans know his opinions frequently. All right, now this is we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of everything.
And understanding where he started is essential to understanding why his name carries so much weight in trade conversations today. Back in 2020, the Denver Broncos selected him 15th overall in a draft class that's since become one of the most scrutinized wide receiver groups in modern NFL history. Justin Jefferson went 22nd that same night. CeeDee Lamb went 17th. Both of those players turned into perennial All-Pro talents almost immediately, redefining what a rookie receiver could look like in today's league. Jeudy did not get that same trajectory, and a large part of that wasn't even about his own ability. Denver cycled through starting quarterbacks like a rotating door during his 4 seasons there. Drew Lock 1 year, Teddy Bridgewater the next, and eventually a version of Russell Wilson that never resembled the player Seattle once built an entire offense around. Jeudy never had the benefit of consistent quarterback play, and his statistics reflected that instability. Across those 4 seasons in Denver, he never surpassed roughly 850 receiving yards in a single year, a modest number for a receiver selected with that kind of draft capital. Fair or not, league insiders and analysts started whispering that he was talented but fragile, gifted but frustrating, a technically excellent route runner who never quite became the number 1 option his draft slot suggested he should be. Then came the summer of 2024, when a legal situation involving a weapons charge became public record. That charge was later dropped, and it's important to be precise here, because this is exactly the kind of moment where a story can spiral into unfair exaggeration if it isn't handled carefully. What's confirmed is that the charge existed and was ultimately dismissed by the legal system. What's not confirmed, and what should never be treated as established fact, is any narrative that extends beyond that simple sequence of events. But perception matters enormously in professional football, and rightly or wrongly, this situation added another layer to the growing idea that Jeudy carried baggage wherever he went. So when Denver traded him to Cleveland that same offseason, he didn't arrive as a clean slate the way a typical veteran acquisition might. He arrived as a talented receiver with a complicated file already attached to his name, a file built from 4 years of quarterback instability, modest statistical production relative to his draft position, and a legal situation that generated headlines before it was resolved. That file is exactly what's being referenced now. Every single time his name comes up in trade conversations heading into this deadline, and it's worth remembering as we move forward, because what happened next on the field tells a very different story than the one his reputation suggests.
Show your work. Don't tell me about nothing. He's just terrible. Every time I get in a conversation, I need you to say and argue your point without saying terrible. Don't say terrible. I need you to find a new word in your vocabulary. See, what this quarterback coach has shown you and told you, which you might not understand because you guys aren't breaking this down, or you don't want to understand this. He's saying that there are times on the football field, Shedeur Sanders sees something, whether it's in a zone or a coverage or something, and he throws a route that may not even be the primary target. The coach says,
Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, because the file everyone keeps referencing doesn't match what actually happened once Jeudy put on a Browns uniform. In his first season with Cleveland, during one of the most chaotic and disastrous years in recent franchise memory, Jeudy quietly put together the best statistical season of his entire career. Deshaun Watson suffered his second Achilles tear that same season, an injury that would have derailed almost any offense in the league. The Browns cycled through multiple starting quarterbacks trying to find any semblance of stability at the position, throwing different combinations of arms into the lineup week after week with no consistent rhythm ever established. And in the middle of that chaos, without a single reliable quarterback throwing him the ball for any extended stretch, Jeudy surpassed 1,000 receiving yards for the first time in his professional career. Think about that for a moment, because it's a genuinely remarkable accomplishment given the circumstances surrounding it. A receiver who had been labeled inconsistent, moody, and difficult to build a passing game around put up a career-best season in one of the most unstable quarterback situations in the entire NFL that year. That's not the profile of a player who is failing to meet expectations. That's the profile of a player succeeding despite circumstances that would sink most careers, adapting to whatever quarterback was thrown into the lineup and still producing at a level he'd never reached in Denver, even with far more talent surrounding him there. And yet somehow, despite that career year, the trade rumors surrounding him are louder now than they've ever been at any point in his career. That disconnect between actual on-field production and public perception is the first real sign that something else entirely is driving this conversation. Something that has far less to do with Jeudy's measurable performance and far more to do with the direction the front office wants to take the franchise moving forward. If this were purely about talent evaluation, a career-best statistical season should be strengthening his position within the organization, not weakening it. Instead, reports suggest the opposite is happening, which forces an obvious question that deserves real attention. If production isn't the deciding factor here, then what actually is? That question is exactly what leads us into the next piece of this puzzle. Because the answer appears to be connected to decisions the front office has been reportedly willing to make regarding players far more established and celebrated than Jeudy himself. Decisions that reveal a much larger pattern about how this organization currently views roster construction and asset value heading into an uncertain future. So if his production was genuinely strong enough to justify a bigger role, why is his name suddenly floating so prominently in trade speculation? The answer, according to reporting from outlets covering the team closely, starts with a comparison that's genuinely difficult to ignore once you understand its full context. Earlier this year, the Browns were reportedly willing to at least entertain serious conversations about moving on from Myles Garrett, a generational pass rusher widely considered one of the most feared and dominant defensive players in the entire NFL. Garrett isn't just a good player on a rebuilding roster. He's arguably the single most talented and accomplished player Cleveland has had on either side of the ball in the last decade, a perennial All-Pro and one of the faces of the franchise for years. If a front office is willing to even discuss trading a player of that magnitude, the logic naturally follows that nobody else on the roster should be considered untouchable, regardless of talent level or recent production. That's precisely the argument being made by outlets like Dog Pound Daily, who have suggested that the timing may finally be right for Cleveland to move on from Jeudy specifically, using the Garrett situation as evidence of a broader organizational mindset shift. To be completely clear here, this remains reported speculation rather than a confirmed front office decision, and it should be treated with that appropriate level of caution. Nobody within the organization has publicly confirmed active trade discussions regarding Jeudy specifically, but the reasoning behind the speculation lines up with an identifiable pattern that's worth examining honestly. Teams that are genuinely willing to trade away generational, foundational talent are usually teams that have consciously shifted into asset management mode, a mindset that prioritizes long-term roster flexibility and draft capital accumulation over short-term comfort or star power. This kind of shift typically happens when a front office has internally concluded that the current roster construction isn't positioned to compete for a championship in the immediate future, making it more strategically valuable to convert proven assets into future resources rather than holding onto them purely for reputation's sake. And once you start looking closely at Cleveland's other roster moves and draft decisions from this offseason, that broader pattern becomes significantly harder to dismiss as coincidence or unrelated noise, which brings us directly into the next piece of evidence that's been fueling this entire conversation among analysts and insiders covering the team. Because here's the piece of evidence that keeps getting brought up repeatedly by people covering this situation, and it's hard to argue against its significance. In the most recent draft, the Browns selected 2 wide receivers within the first 2 rounds, Carnell Tate and Denzel Boston, a substantial investment of premium draft capital into a single position group in one draft class. Teams typically don't allocate resources that heavily into one position unless they're consciously planning for a significant shift at that position within the next year or two. It doesn't necessarily mean Jeudy is being pushed out the door immediately, but it does strongly suggest the front office is deliberately building youth and depth at receiver regardless of what ultimately happens with him specifically. When you add that draft investment to the reported willingness to discuss trading Myles Garrett, a clearer picture starts to emerge of a front office that isn't afraid to disrupt its own current roster if it genuinely believes there's a meaningful long-term benefit to doing so, even if that means moving away from proven, productive veterans in the short term. Some reporting has also floated Cedric Tillman as a potential trade piece heading into the deadline, but insiders reportedly believe Jeudy would command a significantly larger return given both his contract situation and his recent on-field production, making him the more logical trade chip from a pure value perspective if the front office does decide to move a receiver. None of this should be treated as confirmation of an active, ongoing negotiation with any specific team, but the pieces being discussed publicly and consistently across multiple outlets are aligned enough that it's not unreasonable to understand why Jeudy's name keeps resurfacing in these conversations. Layer on top of this the fact that Cleveland's quarterback room heading into this season became one of the most unusual and crowded situations in the entire league, featuring a mix of established veteran arms and completely unproven rookie talent all competing for meaningful reps during camp. That kind of quarterback competition typically signals an organization that hasn't fully settled on its long-term direction at the most important position on the field, which naturally raises questions about how every other position group, including wide receiver, might be evaluated and potentially restructured around whatever direction that quarterback competition ultimately resolves itself in. Somewhere in the middle of that crowded quarterback competition sits Shedeur Sanders, a name that dominated pre-draft conversation for almost a full calendar year before the actual draft even took place. Sanders, the son of Deion Sanders, put together a genuinely strong and productive college career at Colorado, showcasing arm talent, poise in the pocket, and a level of football intelligence that had scouts and analysts buzzing throughout the process. For a significant stretch of time last year, he was being mentioned seriously as a potential top 5 overall pick, with some evaluators comparing his skill set favorably to established NFL starters already succeeding at the highest level. Then something happened that stunned nearly everyone watching the draft process unfold in real time. He slid. Team after team passed on him, round after round, in one of the most talked about and dissected draft slides in recent NFL memory, a fall that generated endless speculation about what teams might be seeing in private evaluations that wasn't visible to the public. By the time Cleveland finally selected him, it was in the 5th round, a stunning and almost unprecedented fall for a player many respected analysts had rated as a legitimate first-round talent just months earlier during the pre-draft process. That dramatic slide created an entire narrative around Sanders before he had thrown a single professional pass in a real NFL game. Analysts publicly questioned his overall readiness for the professional level. Radio hosts and television personalities called him a project.
Time right now, we'll entertain silly stories. Nah, they just talk. When that camp open, it's called Sorry Honey, It's Football Season. All them extracurriculars stop. We ain't trying to hear no tabloids. We ain't going to do no yard work. We ain't moving around doing nothing. that when they get to be August and it's camps and games on TV, the entire community is not trying to hear it. We got a whole different attitude. We're like, listen, no. All that fluff stuff, don't you come in here with that fluff. You better be telling me exactly what's going on today at practice. We don't give a nothing about nothing else.
Someone who would need years of development before ever contributing meaningfully. Some outright labeled him a mistake, suggesting he was more of a media-driven story built on his family name rather than genuine on-field football ability worthy of that level of attention. For months, that skeptical narrative dominated sports talk shows and social media discourse alike, and almost none of it was actually based on what he was doing on a real practice field, simply because there wasn't any professional tape yet available for anyone to actually evaluate. That's an important and often overlooked distinction, because criticism built entirely on speculation about why a player slid is a fundamentally different thing than criticism built on actual observed evidence from real practice reps and game situations, which is exactly the kind of evidence that started becoming available once organized team activities and training camp got underway in Cleveland. And once real evidence started coming in from those organized team activities and subsequent camp reports, the surrounding conversation reportedly started to shift in a noticeably different direction. According to accounts describing his work with quarterback coaches, including reported film sessions with coach Mike Borgonzi, something specific stood out about Sanders that goes well beyond simple measurables like arm strength or athletic testing numbers from the draft combine process. It's his pre-snap and in-play processing ability, a trait that's notoriously difficult to teach and even more difficult to accurately evaluate before a player ever steps onto an actual professional field against professional-level competition and disguise. Reports describe specific moments where Sanders would throw to a receiver who wasn't even the primary read designed into a particular play call, and when coaches reviewed the film afterward and asked him directly why he made that specific decision, his explanation reportedly matched exactly what the defensive coverage was actually doing in that moment. A leverage shift here, a safety cheating laid over the top there, an underneath option that got taken away right before the snap by a defender's subtle pre-snap movement. He reportedly saw these adjustments happening in real time and adjusted his read accordingly, instead of panicking under pressure or forcing a throw into a window that wasn't actually open the way the initial play design assumed it would be. That's not a flashy, highlight reel skill that shows up dramatically on a stat sheet. It's something considerably harder to teach and develop, an anticipatory understanding of defensive coverage rotations and disguises that most rookies, even genuinely talented ones with strong physical tools, simply don't possess this early in their professional careers. If these accounts from coaches and insiders are accurate representations of what's actually happening in these film sessions, and they should be treated as reported observations rather than confirmed statistical fact, since there isn't currently a public data set tracking this specific kind of processing metric, they collectively suggest Sanders might genuinely be further along mentally and cognitively than his dramatic draft slide ever suggested to outside observers. This raises an important question worth sitting with. If a fifth-round quarterback is already demonstrating this level of advanced processing in practice settings, what does that suggest about how NFL front offices actually evaluate quarterback prospects during the pre-draft process? And how much weight gets placed on factors that have little to do with what actually happens once a player is given real coaching, real structure, and a genuine opportunity to develop within an NFL system built around his specific strengths? This is where a bigger and more important conversation needs to happen, because football criticism in modern sports media often gets flattened into overly simple categories that don't reflect the actual complexity of player evaluation. Great or terrible, bust or superstar, franchise cornerstone or complete waste of a roster spot. There's rarely genuine room within that binary framework for nuance, for the reasonable idea that a young quarterback can be legitimately raw in certain specific areas while simultaneously showing advanced, NFL-ready traits in other equally important areas. Processing speed, pre-snap recognition, and anticipatory decision-making are foundational skills that translate meaningfully across every single level of competitive football. And if a rookie is already demonstrating those particular traits consistently in practice repetitions, that represents a genuinely meaningful building block for long-term development, regardless of what his overall statistical line might look like during an inevitably rocky rookie season. Too many public takes during this past offseason judged Sanders purely on external outcome, on where he happened to get selected in the draft, on public perception shaped by media narratives without properly accounting for what was actually happening on the practice field once real coaching began. That's the exact trap that swallowed a significant portion of the offseason media narrative surrounding him, and it's a large part of why the overall tone has reportedly started shifting now that real practice reps and legitimate evaluation opportunities are actually happening. Because here's an important truth about offseason sports talk that's worth acknowledging honestly. It's cheap content by design, produced primarily to fill programming hours. There's no actual football being played on television in May and June, so shows need something to fill available airtime, and unverified narratives built around draft slides or perceived attitude issues are remarkably easy to produce and even easier to argue about endlessly without any real accountability for accuracy. But that entire dynamic changes dramatically the moment training camp officially opens and pads actually start hitting in real practice situations. Suddenly, opinions that were built entirely on vibes, speculation, and old reputations get genuinely tested against actual film and observable performance. Fans reportedly stop wanting empty hot takes and start demanding real practice reports grounded in what's actually happening on the field. Radio hosts stop wanting hypothetical scenarios and start wanting concrete results they can point to and discuss with actual evidence. That fundamental shift is exactly the environment Sanders has reportedly been waiting for throughout this entire process. A stage where his actual play, not the surrounding noise generated by his unusual draft slide, finally gets the opportunity to do the talking on his behalf. Meanwhile, Browns fans are reportedly split right down the middle on this entire situation. And it's genuinely easy to understand why once you consider both sides of the argument fairly. On one side, there's a substantial group of fans who are frustrated by what they perceive as Jeudy's ongoing inconsistency and emotional volatility throughout his career, and they're ready to fully commit to a youth movement built around the newly drafted receivers, and whatever the quarterback room ultimately becomes once the competition sorts itself out. They're genuinely excited by the buzz coming out of training camp, energized by every report of a big throw from Sanders during practice, and generally ready to bet on long-term upside over currently proven, established production from a veteran who has publicly expressed frustration in multiple organizations throughout his relatively short career. On the other side of this debate, there's an equally passionate group of fans who see this entire approach as unnecessarily reckless given the current circumstances. Jerry Jeudy is coming off the best statistical season of his professional career. Why would any front office choose to trade away a genuinely productive receiver in the middle of an already difficult rebuilding process, instead of using his experience and production as a stabilizing veteran presence for a young quarterback who's still trying to find his footing at the professional level? Both of these arguments carry genuine merit when you examine them honestly, and that fundamental tension is exactly why this entire situation has generated so much public discussion across social media, sports talk radio, and dedicated fan forums throughout the offseason. There's no single, obviously correct answer here, only two competing organizational philosophies about how to properly build a roster during an uncertain transitional period for a franchise still searching for long-term stability at multiple key positions. Some fans point to recent history around the league, citing examples of teams that successfully rebuilt by aggressively prioritizing youth and draft capital over short-term comfort, while other fans point to cautionary examples of franchises that gutted productive veteran talent too quickly and ended up setting their long-term development back significantly by rushing young, unproven players into roles they weren't adequately prepared for. This ongoing philosophical disagreement among the fan base mirrors a similar tension reportedly happening within the front office itself, and it's exactly this kind of genuine, unresolved uncertainty that makes the coming trade deadline and subsequent training camp battle for playing time such a genuinely compelling storyline to continue following closely as actual decisions start getting made. So here's where all of this ultimately leaves us, and it's genuinely bigger than any single receiver or any individual quarterback competing for a roster spot this summer. What we're watching unfold in Cleveland right now isn't simply a routine roster decision about one trade before a deadline. It's fundamentally a test of organizational philosophy that will likely define how this franchise operates for years to come. Do you build a roster around proven, established production, even when that production comes from a player carrying a complicated public history and reputation? Or do you deliberately bet on long-term upside, on developmental traits, on a genuine belief that a young quarterback's ability to process defensive coverage in real time is ultimately worth more than a receiver's current, tangible statistical output? There's no universally correct answer to that difficult question, and that persistent uncertainty is exactly why this entire situation has captured so much sustained attention from fans and analysts alike. Jerry Jeudy earned a legitimate career year through genuine talent, resilience, and adaptability, regardless of whatever continues to be said publicly about his uncertain future in Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders overcame one of the most publicly scrutinized draft slides in recent memory and is reportedly demonstrating something in practice that his harshest critics never adequately accounted for during the offseason narrative cycle. Both of these individual stories can be entirely true and valid at the same time, and both players genuinely deserve to be judged based on what actually happens on the field going forward, rather than by narratives that were constructed long before either of them ever took a single competitive professional snap that actually mattered. Whatever Cleveland ultimately decides to do before this trade deadline arrives, one thing has become increasingly clear throughout this entire process. This franchise is no longer making critical decisions based purely on comfort, reputation, or past draft investment. It's making decisions based on genuine internal belief in what it thinks the future of this organization should actually look like. And the entire league is about to find out whether that calculated bet ultimately pays off once the games that actually count for something in the standings finally begin this season.
Time right now, we'll entertain silly stories. Nah, they just talk. When that camp open, it's called, sorry, honey, it's football season. All them extracurriculars, stop. We ain't trying to hear no tabloids. We ain't going to do no yard work. We ain't moving around doing nothing. That when they get to be August and it's camps and games on TV, the entire community is not trying to hear it. We got a whole different attitude. We're like, listen, no. All that fluff stuff, don't you come in here with that fluff. You better be telling me exactly what's going on today at practice. We don't give a nothing about nothing else.
Do you have it? I'm going to give you time to get it. But first, Bernie Kosar, who's the QB1 in the Cleveland Browns?
I like Todd, our head coach.
Hold up. I said Bernie Kosar. The legendary Mr. Dixon, Hanford Dixon. I can't believe I said it.
Obviously,
it was the same place.
I have a little history with
with
him because I know him from his days when he was at Southern Mississippi.
That's right.
And obviously, me and Ozzie being best friends, I know him from a little bit over in Baltimore.
Okay.
And I think he's going to be a really, really good head coach because he's a guy that I think is going to hold the players accountable. And when you look at Concepcion, for instance, some of the guys, well, first of all, look at the quarterback position. I would be shocked personally if Shedeur doesn't win that battle. But I like the idea that he's got it open to both guys, talking about both quarterbacks. But I'm just happy. I'm excited. I'm happy, and can't wait for the season to start.
I might just label this video consistency. That's the name of the day today.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
We are going to get right into things. This is courtesy of Dog Pound Daily, man. Here it says the right time for the Browns to trade Jerry Jeudy is becoming obvious. Okay, here it says Jeudy came to Cleveland 2 seasons ago with controversy tied to his name after playing out a tumultuous 4 seasons with the Broncos. He was traded to the Browns in the spring of 2024, and it says the wide receiver has spent his whole career on a roller coaster of emotion. Okay, he doesn't seem happy wherever he is and lets his team and fans know his opinions frequently. All right, now we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes of everything.